When the
He was just
camera
smiling at
washed
the crowd,
ashore,
and in
no
the next
one knew
second there
where
was
it came
blood all
from
over the
until
stage.
they opened the memory card. The last photo it held would send a chill down every diver's spine. There's something about the ocean that makes you believe you're small. It humbles you. It swallows sound, steals the horizon, and dares you to get closer. For Sophie Carter, that feeling was everything. It wasn't just about the photographs. It was about being there, truly there, surrounded by nothing but saltwater silence and the possibility of something watching. Sophie was 33 years old, a seasoned underwater photographer from Perth, Western Australia, with a soft voice and sharp eye. She wasn't the kind of person to post daily selfies or chase likes. Her work had been featured in National Geographic and marine wildlife journals, but she never bragged. She let her photos speak for her: a whale calf nuzzling its mother off Tonga, a school of jacks swirling like silver tornadoes off Mexico, a blue-ringed octopus curled around her lens, each frame a quiet miracle. She lived modestly. No spouse, no kids. Just a one-bedroom apartment, 2 cats and shelves lined with waterproof gear. Her calendar wasn't filled with weddings or baby showers. It was marked by migration seasons, tide charts, and moon cycles. Friends described her as obsessively focused, deeply kind, and maybe a little too fearless. But that fearlessness would cost her. In early February of 2023, Sophie arrived at Eyre Peninsula, a rugged stretch of coastline in South Australia, known for its great white shark activity. It wasn't a tourist destination. This was where raw ocean met jagged cliffs. It's where the sea didn't just shimmer, it warned. Sophie had one goal: to photograph a great white shark in open water without a cage. Most would call that suicide. But Sophie didn't see it that way. She believed if you respected the ocean, it would respect you back. She wrote in her journal the night before: "No bait, no metal bars, just me, the water, and what lives in it. I want them to see me. I want to see them for real." The morning of February 12th started calm. She boarded a small fishing boat with a local guide named Mark Gruff, sun-leathered, and not thrilled about her plan. He'd taken out cage divers before, but never someone going solo. "It's your life," he muttered, watching her gear up. "But that water's not your friend." She smiled, zipped up her wetsuit, and gave him a thumbs up. By 9:20 a.m., they reached a GPS-marked site about 6 miles offshore, known locally as the Pit, a deep channel where seals sometimes gathered and where sharks followed. Sophie did a quick safety check, clipped her camera gear to her harness, and eased herself into the water. No backup diver, no support below the surface. Just a tether line leading to a buoy and a GoPro mounted to her dive mask. She disappeared beneath the surface like a bubble slipping from view. Mark waited on the boat. He cracked a beer, stared at the sea, and checked his watch. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Still no sign of Sophie. He started calling her name. No answer. The ocean just rocked quietly, as if nothing had happened at all. By the 1-hour mark, Mark panicked. He reeled in the buoy line. It was cut. Not frayed, not tangled. Clean cut. Sophie never resurfaced. No one knew what happened to her until 3 days later, when a beach walker in Coffin Bay found something strange in the sand: a broken underwater camera case scratched and half buried near a pile of seaweed. Inside was a sealed memory card, still dry. When authorities opened it, they expected to find murky water or accidental clicks. Instead, they found 47 photographs and one final image that made every expert freeze. It was blurry. The light fractured. But right at the center, just a few feet from the lens, was a massive dark shape moving fast, wide-jawed, and aimed directly at whoever had taken the shot. The shutter had caught the very last second before everything went black. And Sophie Carter was never seen again. The footage from Sophie's GoPro wasn't dramatic. It wasn't what Hollywood would have scripted. There were no screams, no wild thrashing, just quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach knot without knowing why. Investigators at the Marine Incident Response Unit in Port Lincoln reviewed the recovered footage in a dimly lit room. No press, no family. Just the whir of a desktop fan and a computer screen that held quite possibly the final minutes of a life lived underwater. The timestamp read 11:39 a.m., February 12th. The camera began recording automatically when Sophie submerged. For the first minute, everything felt serene. You could hear her breath through the regulator, steady and calm. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She adjusted the camera angle, catching a wide shot of the blue vastness around her. A school of bait fish shimmered to the left. Sunlight sliced through the water in golden shafts. At 11:41, a shadow entered frame. Massive, broad, smooth, not close, not yet, but unmistakable. A great white shark easily over 15 feet. It swam with that signature motion, lazy but powerful, like it owned the place. Which, of course, it did. Sophie didn't panic. She actually tilted the camera upward to frame it better. This was what she came for. At 11:42:30, the shark veered off out of frame. Sophie slowly rotated, scanning the blue on all sides. She was hovering roughly 35 feet below the surface. The tether line drifted above her, connected to the buoy she'd dropped on entry. Her breathing stayed even, but something in her posture shifted. She turned quickly. The shark had reappeared. Closer this time. Circling. The footage caught it gliding in from the right, then disappearing behind her shoulder. You could tell she was tracking it. She rotated with it, but not aggressively. More like cautiously. And then came the moment no one ever forgets. At 11:46:12, the water ahead of Sophie darkened. A rush of motion. The camera jerked slightly, either from her pulling away or a force hitting her. The shark was now just feet away, and it wasn't circling anymore. The final frame froze at 11:46:27. A blur. A close-up swirl of white belly, gray muscle, open jaw, and sunlight fractured by impact. Then the screen went black. The card kept recording for another 30 seconds, just the sound of water sloshing, something scraping plastic. And then nothing. Sophie never made it back to the surface. Her buoy line was found sliced clean, likely by a powerful bite or impact. No blood trail, no sign of her wetsuit. Only that one final shot, 1 millisecond before silence. Authorities believe she was struck or bitten, either fatally or severely, and then pulled downward. A test bite, they called it, how great whites sometimes investigate unfamiliar objects. But when your body is the object, there's no second chance. When the media caught wind of the footage, they begged for access. News stations, online tabloids, shark documentaries. But the family said no. This isn't spectacle, her brother Matthew told a local reporter. This was her life. She loved the ocean more than anything. And in the end, the ocean took her. Marine biologists issued their own take. Sophie wasn't reckless, they said. She was skilled, calm, respected the boundaries. But she'd also made a critical decision, diving alone without a cage in a known shark hotspot, with no second diver or chase boat in the water. It wasn't one wrong move. It was a series of risks that aligned perfectly with nature's most unforgiving moment. Back in Port Lincoln, the head investigator paused the video on that final frame, the shape rushing toward the lens. He whispered, "She didn't even flinch." And maybe that's what hurts the most. The sea doesn't always give back what it takes. That's something locals on the Eyre Peninsula know well. Out here, fishermen have lost nets, engines, fingers, and sometimes people. The ocean swallows things whole. That's just the deal. But something about Sophie Carter's disappearance struck different. The day she vanished, February 12th, was calm. No squalls, no rogue waves, no malfunctioning gear. She wasn't new to diving. She wasn't inexperienced. She was just gone. One moment suspended in the deep, the next nothing. When Mark the fisherman who dropped her off radioed the Coast Guard at 12:45 p.m., he sounded shaky. He kept repeating, "She didn't come back up. The line's gone. She didn't come back." By late afternoon, a full search and rescue operation was underway. Marine rescue boats, helicopters, and local dive teams scoured the area around her last known coordinates, roughly 6 miles off the coast, near a trench called the Pit. The water there drops fast, hundreds of feet, within just a few miles of shoreline. Visibility shifts by the hour, and currents move like ghosts. They found nothing. No wetsuit, no mask, no gear, no sign of distress. It was as if Sophie had simply dissolved. By day, 2 hopes of a rescue faded. The mission turned from search and rescue to search and recovery. Volunteers still showed up. Divers pushed deeper. But the mood shifted. Everyone felt it. The silence in the water was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. And everyone kept asking the same quiet question. What exactly happened down there? Then came day 3. A woman named Julie Harper, 54, was walking her golden retriever along Coffin Bay, a wind-swept stretch of sand about 30 miles from Sophie's dive site. The dog kept pulling toward a clump of seaweed. That's when Julie saw it, a half-buried camera, housing scratched cracked, but still sealed. At first, she didn't think much of it. Old fishing gear washes ashore all the time. But when she picked it up and flipped it over, she saw a name, S. Carter, etched in marker on the underside. Julie called it in. Authorities retrieved the housing and carefully opened it at the Marine Lab in Port Lincoln. Inside the camera itself was water-damaged, unusable. But tucked inside was a waterproof memory card. Intact. Uncorrupted. When they powered it on and saw the date stamp, February 12th, 2023, they knew. They had her last moments. The news hit Sophie's family hard. But strangely, they found comfort in it too. At least we know she was doing what she loved. Her mother said through tears. She wasn't afraid. You can see it in her face. She was calm. Investigators pieced together a rough timeline. Sophie entered the water around 10:45 a.m. Her GoPro began recording at 11:39. The shark appears at 11:41. The final image is taken at 11:46:27. The footage ends seconds later. The entire encounter lasted less than 8 minutes. 8 minutes of silence. 8 minutes that changed everything. Marine biologists and dive safety experts reviewed the data. While they all agreed Sophie was well-trained, highly skilled, and not acting carelessly, they also pointed to a pattern. She was alone. She was without a cage. She was in a known shark territory at peak hunting depth with limited visibility. There was no safety diver, no alternate plan, and no surface support other than a single boat. One expert put it bluntly, Sophie didn't make one fatal mistake. She made 5 small ones. And in the ocean, that's all it takes. Back at the shoreline where the camera washed up, someone placed a small wooden cross in the sand. No plaque, no flowers, just a quote etched in the wood. The ocean is not cruel, it is honest. And for the Carter family, that honesty came wrapped in salt and silence. They never found Sophie's body, but they found what the ocean chose to return. A story in pictures. A life frozen at the edge of something wild. And a reminder that even the calmest sea can carry teeth beneath the surface. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. But sometimes it holds the last one you'll ever speak. The final image from Sophie Carter's camera was blurry, barely composed. A rush of movement, murky light, and a massive dark form streaking toward the lens. There were no screams, no visible panic. just the cold silence of the deep and the unblinking truth of a camera shutter that captured the moment just before it all disappeared. At 11:46:27 a.m. on February 12, 2023, the final photograph on Sophie's memory card was taken. Investigators stared at it for hours, trying to decipher every pixel. There was no blood, no flash of teeth, no visible contact, just a swirling blur of white belly-shadowed muscle and fractured sunlight. You could almost convince yourself it was abstract, if not for the overwhelming feeling it left behind. Fear, not Sophie's. Hers was absent from the frame. The fear came from knowing what happened next, and knowing there was no one there to stop it. Marine biologist Dr. Natalie Burns, who had reviewed shark encounter footage for over 2 decades, was brought in to analyze the image and surrounding data. Her verdict: what we're seeing here isn't an attack out of aggression. It's not feeding behavior. This was a test bite, a curiosity that turned catastrophic. The shark was investigating, but the investigation ended fatally. She went on to explain that great whites rarely target humans deliberately. In most known attacks, the shark backs off after the first bite. But when you're 35 feet below the surface alone with no backup, no cage, and no chance to retreat, a test is all it takes. The framing of the photo told its own story. Sophie had adjusted her position. Her breathing, audible through the video, had remained steady. That means she likely saw the shark approaching and kept the camera focused right up until the moment of contact. Not out of arrogance, not even out of bravery, but out of focus. That was what she was there for, to capture the truth. And she did. The debate began almost instantly. Should the photo be released to the public? Sophie's family said no. They didn't want her final moment turned into clickbait. She wasn't a spectacle, her father told a local paper. She was a seeker. But the image still found its way into marine safety briefings, shown in closed-door presentations to divers and wildlife photographers. The photo wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to remind. One instructor put it simply: this isn't a horror story. It's a moment where one of the best lost sight of how close she was to the edge. And the ocean doesn't give warnings. It just reacts. Sophie's memory card was preserved along with her final images in a climate-controlled archive at the Australian Institute of Marine Research. Beside it sits her dive log handwritten notes from the morning she vanished. Light is perfect, current calm, visibility strong. No sign of sharks yet, but I feel them. Just out of frame. She was right. The ocean was watching. And in that last image, the ocean looked back. When asked if she believed Sophie was afraid in her final seconds, Dr. Burns paused. She stared at the frozen frame and said, "I think she was in awe. I think she saw something most of us never will. And I think she captured it, beautiful, terrible, and real." She didn't flinch. That final frame now hangs in a private room of the research center, not for tourists, not for media, but for those who go into the deep thinking they are in control. It serves as a final reminder: the ocean does not owe us safety. And sometimes the last thing you see is the thing you loved most. In the weeks after Sophie Carter's disappearance, the waters off South Australia went quiet. It wasn't just the lack of activity, it was the weight of it. Local divers, fishermen, and marine researchers all felt it, as if the ocean itself was mourning, as if it had paused for just a moment to remember the woman who had gone beneath its surface and never come back. Her story spread quickly, not through tabloid headlines, but through whispers in dive shops and biology labs among underwater photographers and ocean conservationists. She wasn't a thrill seeker. She wasn't reckless. She was one of them. Careful, respectful, dedicated, and that's what made her loss so chilling. Sophie had spent over a decade photographing marine wildlife building a portfolio that spoke more through silence than spectacle. She didn't chase blood or danger, she chased presence, stillness. Those fleeting seconds where animal and human acknowledge each other without fear. That's what made the image, the last frame, so hard to look at. It wasn't just a shark. It was everything she believed in, rushing toward her, unblinking and unstoppable. At a private memorial in Perth, friends and family gathered to celebrate her life. Her father, John Carter, stood at a podium and spoke with a folded note in his hand. He didn't read from it. He didn't have to. She always said the ocean was her church, he told the crowd. And I used to joke that it didn't pass the collection plate. But now I realize it did. And she gave it everything. Behind him, a slideshow played. Not just the final dive, but moments from all over the world. Sophie sitting cross-legged on a dock in Belize, smiling beside a sea turtle in Hawaii, holding her mask to her forehead, laughing sunburned alive. There were tears, but there were also laughs. Because Sophie's story wasn't just about loss, it was about love. Love for a world that didn't speak, didn't beg for attention, didn't care who was watching. In the months that followed, Sophie's story was adopted by several marine safety organizations. Her footage and final photographs were shown in dive training seminars across the US, Australia, and Europe. Her name was etched into briefings not as a warning, but as a reminder. Even the most experienced diver is still a guest in the wild. Her family started the Sophie Carter Foundation, aimed at supporting young women entering the fields of marine photography and ocean conservation. One of their first grants helped fund a new research drone designed to track great whites without human interaction. They called it Blue Echo. Sophie's body was never found. Her dive watch eventually washed ashore nearly 3 months later, 100 miles north of her entry point. It had stopped at 11:46, 32.5 seconds after her final photo. No one knows exactly what happened in those final seconds, and maybe that's okay, because Sophie didn't live her life looking for endings. She lived for moments. The sound of a fin slicing through the dark. The shimmer of a jellyfish in early morning light. The quiet click of a shutter when everything for just one heartbeat stood still. That's the moment she died in, and maybe in some way, it's the moment she chose. Today near Coffin Bay, a bronze plaque sits at the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. It reads, "For Sophie Carter, who went looking for beauty and found it just before the deep took her back." Below the quote is an engraving of her final photograph. Not the full blur, just the outline of the great white. Not violent, not monstrous, just present. Because the ocean doesn't tell stories the way we do. It doesn't use words. It remembers in waves, in silence, in blue, and sometimes in one final frame that never stops speaking. For months after Sophie Carter's death, there was a shift in the water. You couldn't see it on tide charts or track it with sonar. But in the diving world, in the quiet conversations held at gear shops, docks, and research vessels, her name kept surfacing. Not with drama, not with fear, but with reverence. Because what happened to Sophie didn't feel like a freak accident. It felt like something closer to a wake-up call, a reminder that even the ocean's greatest admirers aren't immune to its silence. At first, only a few people had access to Sophie's final photo. Marine investigators, safety instructors, and close colleagues. But slowly, through private forums and instructor circles, the image began to circulate. It became more than just a picture, it became a symbol. Dive instructors started using it in orientation briefings, not to scare, but to humanize the risks. The photo wasn't gory, it wasn't sensational, but the shape moving through the water toward the camera said more than words ever could. She did everything right, one instructor in Monterey told his students. Except she forgot that the ocean doesn't care how experienced you are. At a major underwater photography conference in Seattle later that year, One of the keynote panels was dedicated entirely to Sophie's work. Her images were displayed in massive light boxes, a pod of dolphins spiraling beneath a coral shelf, a single seal gazing into her lens, light refracting through a jellyfish's dome like a prism. The final frame wasn't shown, but it hung in everyone's mind like a watermark. Sophie never called herself an activist. She wasn't one for petitions or politics, but her story did what decades of warning signs hadn't it made people take safety seriously. Diving groups started re-evaluating their protocols, especially for solo expeditions. Several marine parks implemented new solo diving restrictions, citing her incident directly. And the Sophie Carter Foundation, run by her brother and two former diving partners, expanded rapidly. What began as a memorial grant turned into a multinational initiative funding safer equipment, underwater communication systems, and educational materials for young divers. They partnered with universities and film schools, offering scholarships to female filmmakers focused on marine life. The tagline of their campaign: Know the Wild, Love the Wild, Respect the Wild. One of the most powerful tributes came from someone who had never met Sophie Lena Torres, a 23-year-old diver from Florida who won the first Carter Foundation Fellowship. She wrote in her application essay, "I don't want to capture fear. I want to capture stillness like Sophie did. But I've also learned from her story that beauty doesn't mean safety, and that respect means knowing when to step back, not just when to lean in." Those words were later quoted on a mural painted on the side of a marine research center in San Diego. The mural features Sophie's silhouette floating mid-water, camera in hand, a shark's shadow in the distance, not threatening, just existing. It's not a warning, it's a reflection. They say the ocean never remembers us, that it erases footprints, names, even wrecks. But Sophie Carter's story didn't disappear. It moved through the water, in currents and conversations, in caution signs posted at dive sites, in photos hung in classrooms, in hands that grip a camera a little tighter before descending into the blue. And maybe that's the legacy she never meant to leave, but left all the same. Not fear, not regret, but clarity. The ocean doesn't ask who you are. It only asks if you understand the cost of getting close. And now, thanks to Sophie, a few more of us do. Sophie Carter's dive watch stopped at 11:46:32 a.m. 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds after her final photograph was taken, a streak of fractured light, a dark mass rushing forward, and the low rumble of water pressure rising in her ears. Then silence. That was all the ocean returned. When her watch washed ashore nearly 3 months later, 100 miles north of her original entry point, it confirmed what many had already feared: Sophie was gone. No body, no wetsuit, no gear. Just a single timestamp, frozen in time the moment nature answered curiosity with instinct. The final photo, pulled from her recovered memory card, wasn't graphic. There was no blood, no torn flesh, just motion. A sudden blur of pale belly, a jagged shape in a rush of bubbles, and then nothing. But sometimes nothing is the loudest thing of all. At first, Sophie's death was labeled a tragic accident. But in time, professionals in the diving world began calling it something else entirely: a threshold moment. Because Sophie wasn't reckless. She wasn't a thrill-seeker or an amateur who ignored the rules. She was one of the best. A skilled underwater photographer with over a decade of experience, published in National Geographic, respected across the field. She knew the risks. She understood the territory. She chose to cross a line just once, and the ocean didn't give her a second chance. At her memorial in Perth, her father, John Carter, stood before a quiet crowd and spoke through tears. "My daughter believed that if you approach the world with respect, it will respect you back. But nature isn't a person. It doesn't owe you kindness. It doesn't give you warnings. It just is." Sophie's final photo wasn't displayed in galleries. Instead, it was shown in dive safety briefings around the world. In training programs, marine institutes, and underwater photography seminars, instructors referred to it as the silent mirror, a moment where beauty, awe, and danger converged in one impossible frame. No blood, no scream, just the calm before everything changed. Her family refused to let her death be reduced to clickbait. Instead, they turned their grief into guidance. They launched the Sophie Carter Foundation funding safety gear for young women in marine photography and supporting shark behavior research. They started a campaign called Passion Deserves Preparation. And respect means knowing when to pull back. 1 year later, a documentary crew returned to the pit, the same site where Sophie vanished. But this time, they brought a cage, a full dive team, surface support, backup plans, redundant communication lines. They didn't come to conquer. They came to remember. They reconstructed her final dive light temperature currents down to the minute. They ended the documentary with the last words Sophie wrote in her dive log. "Light is perfect. Current calm. No sign of sharks yet. But I feel them. Just out of frame." And she was right. Sophie Carter died in the very thing she loved most, the space between human and wild, when there is no barrier, only presence. But presence is not protection. And in nature, the difference between wonder and warning is sometimes just one breath. At a rocky outcrop near Coffin Bay, where her camera was found, a small plaque was installed. It reads, "The ocean is not cruel. It is honest." Beneath it is an etched outline of Sophie holding her camera, a shark's shadow in the distance, not lunging, not snarling. Just there. No violence, no victim. Just a moment. A moment where the ocean spoke its language, silent, swift, and true. Because Sophie's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. A message to all who believe that passion makes you invincible. Loving nature doesn't mean it will love you back. It means you must approach it with humility, with caution, with the full awareness that even the calmest sea can carry teeth beneath the surface. Sophie knew the ocean. She respected it. And in the end, she became part of it.